Got COVID? Alright, welcome to Jim's Crap Shack, and this is another episode of Mayhem. Today we got something special planned for you. What you see before you is a quadcopter drone, but not just any quadcopter drone. It is a Shrike 200mm squared V2, and it is a modified frame that I decided to take in on. First off, I changed the power distribution board to another plate I had from an old frame that I lost most parts for, and I'm retrofitting it with a flight controller board that's a F4 flight controller. So with that being said, let's get to it. Alright, so I'm grabbing my board and laying in grommets to my flight controller, and the grommets are meant to mount onto the screw holes and prevent vibrations onto the flight controller. That's so it's less wear and tear on it. It takes a second to get them on. Usually I pull them through with a pair of tweezers or with my bare hands. It's not too complex, but it's necessary. The thing about this frame is both the board mount and the standoff mount for the top plate to be added on is in the same hole, or on the same holes. So I kind of have to stack it like a sandwich. Right now I'm looking at my wiring, or looking up the wiring for this board, because I plan to wire the camera, the video transmitter, the radio receiver, the 4 ESCs, and the battery lines. And on top of that, the LED strips at the bottom of the frame. Right now I'm screwing on the 4 standoffs to make sure that the board is nice and stable and in place. I usually solder around these in order to have a more stable and ergonomic connection. And overall style, it looks nicer that way. The thing is, I had to make sure that the board wasn't being pressed too hard up against the insulation for my 24 volt LED strip wiring. I used jumper lines or jumper wire in order to have a solid connection for those LED strips. Just so if any impact or anything happens to them, which I doubt, they don't rip and short out the whole board. But they're all soldered onto 4 lines onto one for positive and negative. And that's what you see there on the wiring. So right now I'm laying in flux in order to tune my pads. You always want to do a little bit of flux between your pads, just so the heat distribution works out. So right here I'm grabbing my battery lines. I'm gonna solder my battery lines in place along with soldering my LEDs to the battery lines. And the only reason I'm doing this is because my LED strips are 24 volts, so they can go higher than 16 volts. My current build is a 6S. No, yeah, I think it's a 6S. It's a 16 volt battery that it uses. So I'm laying in positive. That's the white wire for my LEDs, and I've already laid in my positive for the battery. So I like to use tweezers to guide it in and have it snug to the pad properly. I usually like to work on my boards from one point to another. So from one corner I start and then work my way across to the other corner and then the side corner. Right here I'm kind of adjusting my wiring. There's not enough wire coming out of the insulation. I'm also running camera It's HD. It's Sony HDR V1U, something like that. It's great for recording high details in close-ups, times 20 zoom. So as you can see, I'm working on the other side now, making sure that the wiring is going up nice. Try to get as much details as possible, and as many close-ups as I can without my hands in the way too much. You gotta make do with what you got, right? So you see I'm laying in my flux, doing this kind of professional. Building guns is like pretty therapeutic for me, and then the reward is like so much bigger. It's like than anything I've ever experienced. So I'm prepping my ESCs. I take it one step as I go. I like to do the ESCs first because they're the most important. You want to make sure that the soldering isn't touching anything, or that the wires are not shorting to anywhere. That'll cause smoke all throughout your motor. And then you have to replace a lot more than just a flight controller. I'm usually saving the motor signal lines for last. I'm going to do some cleaning up once I have everything packed on. Right here I'm strategizing the length I need to trim the side wires, or the side lines for the ESCs. I won't tin them until after I'm done using the soldering iron for the signal lines on the motor. But I will prep them right now with some flux. I also changed tips because with the smaller pads, they're a bit thinner, and if you overheat them, they can actually stick to your soldering iron and lift off the pad or lift off the board. Then you'll ruin the whole board. So the good thing about these flight controllers is they're made durable, so they can handle some heat. They're very heat resistant when it comes to stuff like this. I just don't like to have my soldering iron for too long on the pads. Just enough to where it smelts properly. That's all you need, really. You always want to make sure you're checking your reference constantly too, just to make sure you're laying in the right work, and you're not soldering on the wrong pads or soldering the wrong polarity onto the board. It's very costly at the end of the day. In professional settings, that's a lot of money to be replacing boards every time you get it wrong. So right now, I'm gonna grab my camera, my video transmitter, and my radio receiver. I'm gonna start soldering those into place too, now that I have my battery lines in and most of my ESCs are already in place. This is one of my favorite parts. I'm re-tinning or prepping the tin on my lines, even though everything was desoldered from the original board or the previous board. I like to keep them fresh when I'm getting ready to solder them in. So I'm prepping the camera right now. I'm soldering that in first. It's just so satisfying watching your lines smelt in properly with ease. Now I'm doing the radio receiver now that I finished the camera. And it takes a little bit of fixing, strategizing. I kind of already have an idea of what I'm doing here because I've done it like 4 times. And I'll get to that in a second of why it took me so long took me so many times to fix this drone. But pretty much the camera's on now, and I'm getting ready to do a transmitter, the video transmitter that is, both the camera and radio receiver. It doesn't take too much to get this thing going. And I like this frame specifically because when you're in the pit, you need quick access to your build if something breaks or anything like that. And the way I designed this circuit is for that, exactly. Quick access to all the components. It doesn't take much to swap out what I need. The only difference is it doesn't have a power distribution board separate from flight controller. It's all in one. So it costs a little more, but it's worth it at the end of the day for saving space on the build. This build I've done 4 times for several different reasons. One was I traded build and I only got the motor back after a friend of mine decided to destroy it, scrap it for parts. So the main thing that's still original on the build right now are the actual motors. Everything else I had to rebuy. I even had to buy a new frame, but I have some spare parts like the spare bottom plate that I decided to utilize instead of a power distribution board. And I have a spare arm just in case one of the arms break during flight. But yeah, right now I'm cleaning up my soldering and I'm laying in the sides. So once I'm done laying in the wiring for the sides of the ESCs, I can start putting the circuits in place. I can start positioning everything into place before I put my top plate on. So yeah. So as I was saying, the second time I had to rebuild this build was because I got it back and I was missing so many parts. I only had the VSMX receiver, which right now I'm using FR Sky XM Plus, only because it's smaller and it works with my Tyrannus right now. I actually I have to buy a new multi-protocol for my Tyrannus because I bricked mine trying to update it firmware. But yeah, the third time, it was because the second time I was rebuilding this, I fried the board and the video transmitter because I wasn't paying attention and I shorted something out. But ultimately, the reason I'm redoing it now is because after the third time that I've rebuilt this thing, I made the battery line too short, and when I landed hard, the impact caused my battery line to come off the board and touch the carbon fiber frame. So I kind of had smoke coming out of the whole thing. But luckily, I got to salvage the ESCs and everything except for the flight controller. But I got lucky with this flight controller. The shop I usually go to, they had something, and it was the last one in stock, just for this build. Shout out to RC Pro Hobbies for the sale. So at this point, I'm pretty much done soldering. Well, almost done soldering. I just noticed something wrong with one of my ESC lines, which I did notice at the beginning of the build. So I'm just cleaning it up and making sure that it's soldered on right. And now I'm assembling the whole build, strategizing on my layout. Even though it's kind of already there, I already have an idea of what I'm doing. So, work time, of course. And right now I'm gonna loop my antenna through the top plate and then zip it down before I start loading in my screws. I think I did it just too soon. Doesn't matter now. At this point, the order's already there, and I'm making sure I zip tie my video transmitter to the top plate because the video transmitter produces a lot of heat, and I don't want it radiating heat to my radio receiver and my flight controller. because those are the closest things to it. So at this point, I'm pretty much done. I am missing 2 screws, which I do end up finding one during this video, that doing this time lapse that I'm doing. And they were both, I found the other one later on, but they were both located nearby each other. One of them was in my backpack, and the other one was in the suitcase I usually keep the parts in. So yeah, I took the extra time to just decide to tighten everything down, make sure it's all nice and set up. But I'm done. So thank you for watching, and I hope you liked the video. Please subscribe for more, and I wish you guys well. Have fun in whatever you guys do. And there's a music list at the end card right here, just in case you guys want to know what music I play. Thanks. You guys have a good one.